With all the tech and cool video gear out these days, it's easy to get bogged down in the amount of stuff there is to buy as a filmmaker. When you're just starting out, you might think you have to get the latest drone plus a professional gimbal and a giant matte box with every mist and anamorphic filter there is before you can shoot anything. Luckily, this is mostly just marketing, and while these tools might help you build up your production value down the line, when you're looking at making your first few projects, you can get away with a pretty simple setup. In this video, I'm going to get into the 5 truly essential things that you need to get started with your documentary project, and some recommendations on what I might pick if I was starting out again. Hey guys, welcome back. And if you're new here, my name is Luke Forsyth, documentary cinematographer and filmmaker, and on this channel, I teach the skills I've learned over 10 years working as a documentary filmmaker and photographer. Okay, so you've decided you want to make a documentary or a short film, and after a few dozen YouTube videos, you're feeling overwhelmed with all the stuff you're supposed to have. When I was first transitioning from professional photography into documentary production, I felt exactly the same way. It seemed like unless I spent an obscene amount of money, I wouldn't be able to shoot anything. But the reality is that is not true. Sure, filmmaking is always going to be an expensive thing to get into compared to, I don't know, soccer or drawing, but you can get by in the beginning with much less than the internet might lead you to believe. In fact, for the first piece of video I ever shot, I only had 3 of these 5 items, and it was still published in Al Jazeera, which is a pretty big outlet. So what are the 5 essentials, and what would I pick if it were me? The first one is pretty obvious. You need a camera. I'm gonna be annoying here and cheat this a little by saying you need a camera and whatever zoom lens comes with it, which I know is technically 2 items, but since they're usually sold as a package deal, I'm gonna take some liberties on this one. I'm also gonna count a battery or 2 and a memory card as included in this because without them, you can't make the camera work. Feel free to vent at me in the comments below. For documentaries, especially when you're starting out, I personally think that zooms are more versatile than primes, and even though some projects might get away with only using primes and look amazing, I'd say this is the exception rather than the rule. Especially if you only have one camera and you're filming moments that can't be repeated again, having the ability to go from wide to detail shots without changing lenses is huge. With one mid-range zoom lens, something like a 24-105 or even an 18-55, you can cover pretty much any normal scene from inside a cramped car to a wide open landscape. As you advance in your career, you might decide to lean more towards primes for stylistic reasons, and I definitely respect that. But if I was shooting my first few assignments and didn't have that kind of confidence, I would absolutely want to zoom. The good news is that camera technology has come so far that it's really hard to find a bad one these days. What you choose depends on your budget, obviously, and what works for me might not be realistic for you. I personally shoot on Sony cameras with an FX9 and an FX3, and I love that combination, but those are pretty expensive cameras and it took me 10 years to work up to them. If you can afford it, then something like an FX3 or an A7S3 or even an FX6 if you can swing it would be on the higher end of things. But you totally don't need to buy $5,000 cameras, and please don't think that these are the only things that will work. When I started out, I was on a crazy tight budget, and my policy with cameras was always to buy whatever the old model was used. So now that the X-T4 is out, something like a Fuji X-T3, or now that the Sony a7 IV is out, look for a used a7 III. If those are too expensive, take a look at older DSLRs on Facebook Marketplace and find one that works for your budget. Just make sure it has a microphone jack and shoots at least HD video. There are probably hundreds of options that will work, and unless someone is paying you to deliver top quality, then don't worry so much if you don't have the newest and best stuff. And if someone is paying you for that, then you should have a better budget anyways. The moral of the story is just get something that doesn't break the bank and start using it, because not shooting anything just because you don't have a red camera is not the way to get better. I'd also add that you'd want to get a variable ND as well, but since you technically can get away in most situations just by riding the aperture and lowering the ISO, I'm not going to say you need it, but it's highly recommended. All right, so you've got a camera with a mid-range zoom, and that's covering you for all the moving action scenes where you're following your characters around, getting a variety of shots as the story happens in front of you. But what about those moments when things are a little slower and you can slow down and really focus on things like shallow depth of field and composition without worrying about missing something? That's when you can start thinking about the second item on the list, a prime lens. I know I just went on and on about zoom lenses, and I stand by my opinion that a zoom lens should be your first priority. In my experience, I'll have a zoom lens on my camera most of the time during a doc shoot, but when the moment allows for it, it's great to have a prime on hand too. This is for things like sit-down interviews or when you find yourself in super low light environments where the higher aperture of your zoom just isn't enough. A single prime lens in your bag can bail you out of all kinds of situations and open up some really cool creative options when you have the time and you're not under as much pressure to capture things in the moment. The debate about which focal length is best will probably never end. But if it were me, I'd get a 24 or 35 probably. Some people also also like 50mm, but it's a little too tight for me to be useful in all situations. 35 would probably be my first choice because it's wide enough to film a decent wide, but also tight enough to use on an interview without distortion, but you can also make a really strong case for 24mm. I know people like Mark Bone keep one of those on their camera pretty much all the time, so you'll have to decide for yourself what works for you in terms of your style. When it comes to which one to get, if you can afford a Sigma art lens, I'd probably go with one of those. They're built really well, they're cheaper than the Canon and Sony lenses, and the image quality is amazing. I have a few of them at different focal lengths, and I think they're the best value for money out there. If those are too much, you could look at something like SLR Magic lenses, which I've also heard good things about. If you look around on DSLR Video Shooters YouTube page, I'm sure you're gonna find a ton of recommendations for great budget lenses. Whatever you end up picking, a single prime lens in combination with a zoom will round out your camera package really nicely. Okay, so that takes care of the camera side of things, but in documentary, video is only half the equation. Some people are adamant that sound is more important than video, and I might even agree with them as much as it hurts me to admit as a DP. Sound is going to create the backbone of your story, and without good sound, you're going to have a tough time in the edit. If you have good audio, you can build out a scene in post and cut around any mistakes in your shots, but if the audio sucks, it's going to be really hard to keep the story rolling. A good example might be the popular Netflix crime series, The Jinx. Spoiler alert here, I'm going to ruin the ending in this next tip, so mute the video if you plan to watch it. Okay, so by the final episode, we've spent 5 hours or something wondering if this guy is the murderer, and right up until the last few minutes, we still don't know. Then he goes into the bathroom and forgets he's wearing a lav mic and admits the whole thing thinking no one can hear him. It's a crazy ending and it makes the whole show. Notice that the shot they have on the screen is about as boring an image as you could imagine, yet because the audio is there, it tells the story. And in docs, story is always king. So to make sure your audio base is covered, you're gonna need two things. And don't worry, I'm not lumping them into one this time. The first is a decent shotgun. I have a few of them and I switch them out depending on the camera and the weight I'm going for. If you have a big shoulder camera like an FX9, then maybe go for something like a Sennheiser 416 at the high end, or maybe down to an MK600 or whatever the Rode equivalent is to save on weight. Those mics are gonna work really well on a bigger rig, but if you're using something smaller like a mirrorless system that doesn't have XLR ports, I'd probably downsize to something like the Rode VideoMic Pro. There are definitely cheaper options out there, but again, just get the best one you can afford. A shotgun is essential for all of your ambient sound, and in some situations, it'd probably work to cover a character as well. And without one, you're kind of screwed for basic audio. But what happens when you're following a character through different environments and they're not always facing you? A shotgun doesn't capture sound well unless it's right in front of the subject, and since people don't always live their lives thinking about the direction of your microphone, you're gonna need a lav mic to make sure you're getting clean audio the whole time. A scene like we just talked about from The Jinx, for example, would never be possible without a shotgun alone, and a lav will work even if your character is in the next room, as long as you keep the camera rolling. Pro tip here, I'll often put the camera down in my lap, but keep rolling as characters talk, just in case they say something interesting. Then you can take that soundbite and layer it over with B-roll in the edit. The classic basic lav mics are Sennheiser ENG series, which I think is now up to the G4. I bought a set of G3s in 2012 and have been using the same ones ever since. You might have to change out the microphone cable itself over the years as they can break, but the actual transmitter and receiver set should last you a really long time. There's also cheaper options like the Rode To Go or whatever it's called, and I'm gonna leave it to you to choose one that works for your budget, but I just say that good audio gear never really goes out of date, so it's worth investing in something decent because you're gonna get to keep it much longer than your camera. Cheap stuff will break faster, and you're gonna spend more in the long run replacing it. Whatever you go for though, you'll definitely want a wireless one, because being tethered to your characters just won't work for a moving dock. So if you have your picture and sound sorted, now it's time to talk about the fifth and final essential, the tripod. No one is really excited about tripods except maybe landscape photographers, but a good tripod can last your entire career. I shoot my stuff handheld probably 90% of the time, but for those moments when you need a steady shot like a sit-down interview or some establishing landscapes, there is no way around it. You're gonna need sticks. I personally use the Sachtler Flowtech 100, which is one of my favorite pieces of gear ever. I actually made an entire video about it and how it stopped a bullet in Mexico, which I'll link to somewhere up here. But that thing is really expensive and probably not what most people are looking for when they're starting out. I know Benro makes some budget tripods and their quality is getting better all the time, and when I started I used one of theirs, so that's also a possible option. Peak design tripods are also pretty cool if you have a smaller camera. When it comes to choosing one for documentaries, especially if you're on a budget, I would worry less about about things like carbon fiber and extreme lightweight, and instead prioritize getting one with a bowl head so you can level it without adjusting the legs. There is nothing more annoying or hard on the back than fiddling with little knobs, trying to drop them down to get it level, and a bowl head is going to make this so much easier. If your tripod isn't level, it's super obvious to everyone watching, so the faster you can do this, the happier you'll be. A single stage release is also nice to have, which basically just means that you only have to open one latch to drop all the leg segments rather than a separate knob or lock for each part of the leg, but it's not a must-have by any means. A tripod is another thing like audio where the technology doesn't change very much, so if you invest in a decent one, you're going to keep it across multiple camera systems. And that's it. With those 5 things, a camera and a zoom, a prime lens, a shotgun, a lav mic, and a tripod, you can cover 99% of documentary situations. You can endlessly add to this kit to the point where you travel with 7 check bags like I do, but those are really the only things you need to get going. I'd say as soon as you can, add a good light, something like an Aperture 120D maybe, so you can up the quality of your sit-down interviews. But when I was first starting out, I didn't have a light and I got by just fine by putting my subjects near a big window, so it's definitely not essential. When I shot my first ever video piece, which was a 2-minute long spot for Al Jazeera about Cambodia's first female MMA fighter, I didn't own a tripod, a light, or even a prime lens. So whatever you do, don't let your lack of gear stop you from getting started. So there it is. I hope this video was helpful in thinking about how to start building out a documentary filmmaking kit. Let me know in the comments if you think I missed anything or what you think the essential items are. And if you like that video, you might like this one where I go into even more detail about my views on the great zoom versus prime lens debate in the context of documentary filmmaking. See ya.